clearly, a theme of this course is that stress can be good. It can be good for memory. In fact, there's lots of research that demonstrates in both animals and humans that too much or too little stress can impede memory formation. But moderate amount of stress can increase memory formation. Stress can be good for attention and for focus. And so if you're about to go into a test, you probably want a small amount of stress so that you're alert and ready to go. Too much stress and you may panic and lose focus. Too little stress and you may be asleep. And stress can be good for motivation. This is a topic that Tim Box talked about a lot in his TED Talk, in which he suggested that too much stress could make you panic and wig out, but too little stress may actually leave you unmotivated to do very much of anything. And so we see a consistent pattern here whereby stress can be good, so long as it is acute, so long as we interpret it as a challenge and believe that we can handle it, and so long as it is of moderate intensity. Now, that last point is the new one, and I'd like to introduce you to the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which is a quite simple upside-down U that accurately represents the general relationship between stress and performance. And what this relationship shows, and it's very consistent over time and discipline, is that both too little and too much stress can impede performance. But we see optimization of performance with a moderate amount of stress, with the right amount of stress. And so, I'd like, in addition to the importance of this point, I'd like you to actually consider this Yerkes-Dodson curve with regard to the climbing to the summit analogy. Where would the climbing to the summit analogy suggest that you should be on this curve? Now, you're going to actually watch another fantastic TED Talk at the end of this lecture that goes into that topic in a little bit more detail. But for now, what I'd like to do is focus on one more area where stress is good. And that is that stress teaches us about stress. Now for this lesson, I'd like you to remember the analogy of the limbic system structures being crying babies. And in that analogy, I suggested these limbic system structures require training, require learning, require scaffolding, require management, and they do. Every time that you enter a stressful situation for the first time, so does your amygdala. And so every time that you're trying to learn how to react in a given stressful situation, your amygdala is also trying to learn how to react in that situation. Now, it may have eons and eons of evolutionary history behind it, which gives it an instinct to detect threat at all times. But what it doesn't have is the understanding of the nuance and the idiosyncrasies of the modern world. And so it needs to be taught. Now, this is a very strange idea that your brain needs to be taught. You generally think of your brain as holding the information that you have learned. You don't generally think of yourself as needing to train your brain, but you do. Your amygdala, in this case, needs to be taught. It needs to be rewarded when it makes an accurate threat prediction. It needs to be informed when it makes an inaccurate threat prediction. And this is the only way that it's going to learn over time and optimize its ability to accurately and optimally detect threat in your environment. So, how do you do this? How do you train your amygdala? Well, you do it the same way that you would train anybody to learn any skill. You expose them to the skill, you allow them to practice that skill over and over, and you give them an opportunity to get feedback on how they performed. Same thing with the amygdala. You need to expose it to stress in certain amounts. You need to give it practice, and you need to let it practice predicting stress, and then you need to give it the opportunity to see how its prediction played out in the real world, how accurate that prediction was. So what am I suggesting? Am I suggesting that everybody just run the whole hog into stress, just accept it and embrace it and just run in full force? No, of course not. But you do need to expose yourself and your stress system to stress in the right amounts early and often. You need to help train it. So what's the right amount? Well, I might suggest that the right amount is whatever level of stress you're able to handle and tolerate without feeling the need to escape. It doesn't really matter how high up the mountain you get. It's more a matter of beginning the trek. In fact, trying to climb the mountain too quickly could be counterproductive. Imagine trying to teach somebody to juggle, and you're not suddenly going to throw them 3 chainsaws and just tell them to go at it. Rather, you're going to give them 1 tennis ball, and you're going to have them throw it up in the air 100 times, and then you're going to ask them to throw it back and forth 100 times, and then if they're ready, you're going to give them a second ball, and you're going to have them throw that up 100 times, and so on and so on and so on. You're going to scaffold the learning. You're going to let them gain comfort at each level of the learning process, and once they've mastered that level of the learning process, you're going to let them advance to the next. So maybe you climb to the first lookout point. Same thing with stress. You need to scaffold your stress system. So expose yourself to a little bit of stress, an amount that you can tolerate, and then allow your amygdala to respond and reward your amygdala. Tell your amygdala whether or not it's responding accurately in that situation, or whether or not it's inaccurate and it's overreacting. And allow your amygdala to practice at that level. Once your amygdala gets good at accurately predicting threat at that level, give it a little bit more stress and a little bit more stress, and let it continue to accurately predict. And every time it gets an A on that threat prediction test, you can move it to the next level and the next level and the next level. Don't go too quickly. In fact, if you go too quickly and you expose your system, your stress system, to too much stress too quickly, you can traumatize your stress system. And we all, at least anecdotally, already know that traumatic stress is bad stress. We're going to talk much more about that in another lecture. So don't go too quickly. However, much more common and equally, if not more problematic, is that people actually go too slowly or actually run back down the mountain. So consider this. You expose your amygdala to a little bit of stress. Your amygdala predicts and overreacts, and you panic, and you start to sweat, and you have a full-blown stress response. And what you do is you retreat, and you leave your lookout point, and you run back down the mountain. Well, what you've done in that situation is you've taken away the opportunity for your amygdala to see what the result of its prediction was. You acted on its prediction and you ran away, and now it doesn't know whether it was accurate or not. And so you need to be able to follow through. So don't pick a level of stress that's too much. Pick a level of stress that you can tolerate. Pick a level of stress that you can see through. Pick a level of stress that will allow your amygdala to recognize and to identify whether or not its prediction was accurate. Allow it to have positive and negative feedback, and then move up the mountain slowly and slowly and slowly. This is the way that you're going to both train your system, become more tolerant to stress, and harden your system to stressful events. The more stress you expose yourself to in a comfortable fashion, the more stress you're going to be able to handle, and the more you're going to be able to start slowly and gradually climb the mountain.